Welcome, everyone. This is Devlen. I'm the Director for Central and Modern Turkish Studies here at Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada. And it's my pleasure to host this first MTS-CTC panel, Council of Turkish Canadians panel, on Turkey. We have a very distinguished panel here today with us, and we will be talking about democratic values and the future of Turkey and what those values should play a Turkish. So sorry about that. That was my feedback. Okay, excellent. That's precisely what we are going to do. So we'll talk about that. So let me very briefly introduce the panel to you before we start our panel. We have three distinguished scholars here joining us today. First, going across 4 different time zones. Let me first welcome Professor Filiz Baskan from Izmir University of Economics. She's a professor at the Department of Political Science and International Relations. She's also my former department chair and a very dear mentor. So I'm very happy to have Professor Baskan here joining us all the way from Izmir, who had a bit of shock yesterday with a very unfortunate disaster, earthquake striking. So our thoughts are with the people who suffered from that disaster. Our second guest is Professor Nilgun Onder. She's an associate professor of politics and international studies at the University of Regina, and as well as the associate vice president of the university responsible for academic affairs. Glad to have you here, Nilgun Hocam. She works broadly on political economy and Turkey's political economy, as well as international relations. And I think you are still the head of the ISA Canada section, as far as I remember. We couldn't make the ISA. So.
Yes, I'm the former president of ISA Canada, yes.
Yes, excellent. And last but not least, we have Professor Birol Yesilada, who is the director director of the Mark O. Hatfield School of Government at Portland State University and the chair of Contemporary Turkish Studies in the same university. Birol Hocam is also sort of the leading figure in Turkish studies in North America, I would say, and a great mentor for all Turkish graduate students in international relations that are doing their PhDs in North America and the United States. So I'm very, very pleased to have him join us here today. We all 4, by the way, also share another commonality, which is our connection to Middle East Technical University, ODTÜ. Both Nilgun Hocam and Filiz Hocam and myself studied at METÜ. Birol Hocam taught at METÜ. So there is that connection. So as a METÜ person, I'm very, very pleased to have this panel. Now, how we will proceed is each panelist would make an opening statements about 7 to 10 minutes, and then we will continue with a series of conversations, and we will wrap up at 1 p.m. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to Professor Baskan first, and have your sort of opening ideas, comments about the importance of these democratic values and the structure of that, as well as for the future of Turkey. Professor Baskan.
Thank you very much, Balkan, for inviting me to this panel with distinguished panelists, distinguished colleagues. First of all, I would like to say that I'm so sad for the people who lost their lives because of the earthquake. It's so hard for me to be here and to concentrate on the topic of the day, but still I will try to do my best. And in relation to this panel, I mean, Balkan and other panelists, we have talked about what are we going to discuss. And basically, I will talk about the notion of secularism in Turkey, because I will try to make some clarification in relation to the historical background of the process of secularization, because I mean, most of the time we are aware of the fact that I mean, there's a misunderstanding and some problems in relation to historical background of the notion of secularism, and we can claim that in fact it has a long history in Turkey. I mean, many people believe that secularization started with the establishment of the Turkish Republic, but it is not the case. I will try to explain the background of the secularism or secularizing reforms that were carried out during the single party period. So, as I mentioned, it has a long history, and we cannot confine it to the Republican era. Because, as you know, the religion of Islam was accepted by Turkish people, and it played a significant role in all stages of the life of people, and also including the administration of the Ottoman Empire, especially. But towards during the later years of the Ottoman Empire, the modernizing elite they viewed the Islam as the main factor which is responsible for the decline of the empire. So that's why they decided to modernize the Ottoman society. They decided to modernize the administrative structure of the Ottoman Empire. So for that reason, they carried out some reforms. And one of the significant components of these reforms were related to the secularization of judicial system and educational system. So, I mean, especially the changes in relation to the judicial system were related to the changing position of the non-Muslim communities specifically. But it is very important to underline the fact that secularization was also the most important trend in the field of education in this era. So they paid special attention to establishing a professional training school specifically for the bureaucracy and the army. And I want to mention that, I mean, these secular schools, which were called as mektebs, they were critical because they produced the reforming cadres of the Republican period. I mean, all the founding leaders or the rulers of the Turkish Republic, they got their education in those secular schools. So that's why I want to underline the significance of these mektebs. But during the second constitutional period, we have also observed the further secularization of judicial and educational system. And in that sense, we can mention some reforms in relation to the curriculum of higher religious schools. They were modernized. The curriculum of higher madrasas was modernized. And the position of women, at least upper class and middle class women in the cities, changed. And the girls began to get some education at different levels. And this is also significant. Primary education was made compulsory for girls in 1913, even before the establishment of the Republic. Okay, when we arrive to the early Republican period, we should say that similar to the modernizing elite of the Ottoman Empire, the founders of the Republic during the early years of the Turkish Republic, they also believe that Islam and some Islamic institutions, they are obstacle in front of progress, in front of democratization of Turkish society. So that's why the Kemalist elite especially, they became sensitive in relation to the issue of Islam, and also they tried to impose a strict secularization on Turkish society. But we should mention that the first wave of these reforms, in fact, they had finished the process of secularization of education and law and state, which had begun during the Tanzimat period and continued during the second constitutional period. So basically, what did the founders of Republic? First of all, they abolished the Sultanate, Caliphate, and also they declared the Republic as the regime of the new country. And we have celebrated the anniversary of the Republic 2 days ago. So they made several reforms in relation to the process of secularization of state, education, and law. But in addition to these reforms, there were some reforms in relation to religious symbols. I mean, the founding leaders of the Turkish Republic, they made some reforms for cutting the links of Turkey with Islamic world and reorienting it to the Western countries. So in that sense, we can give the example of banning fast, for instance, adoption of Western clock and calendar, adoption of Western numerals, and so on. But the most dramatic among these measures was the adoption of the Latin alphabet. It was so critical, and it was another way to cut off Turkish society from its Ottoman and Middle Eastern Islamic traditions and reorient it towards the Western countries. So in other words, we can say that these reforms, they aimed at achieving a radical transformation in Turkey, from an Islamic setting to a Western setting. This is the major aim of the founders of the Republic. But another area regarding the secularizing reforms was related to secularization of social life. This is also significant because the most important step in the secularization of social life was the suppression of tarikats or dervish orders in November 1925. So that means the secularizing reforms extended secularization process beyond formal and institutionalized Islam. So they began to touch upon the vital elements of popular Islam through attacking, through carrying out some reforms regarding the secularization of social life. But we should say that the government in these days, during the single party period, it was successful in suppressing the expression of popular Islam or popular religion in towns and cities. But in the villages, they did not disappear. They just went underground, and then we have observed the return of those repressed tarikats or religious communities, especially after the rise of Democratic Party to power in 1950. And still, we can say that tarikats are, or dervish orders are, critical actors in political life. So as a result, I mean, we can say that some people argue that the Kemalist elite, they cut the ties between them and the majority of Turkish people because of their attack on popular Islam or popular religion. But for some people at that time, for some foreign observers and also for intellectuals, these reforms changed the face of Turkey at that time. They did not just only abolish the Islamic network in the administrative, legal, or educational fields, but also these reforms weakened the impact of Islam in social life. But in that context, maybe I need to underline the one of the problems of secularization process in Turkey, since they were imposed on Turkish society by the modernizing elite, they were not internalized by the peasants, by the majority of Turkish society at that time. These reforms were internalized only by civil servants, by military, by urban intellectual elite, but they were not successful in influencing the daily life of the villagers, who, of course, made up the majority of the Turkish population at that time. In relation to to the process of secularization, I mean, we can say that yes, there was a strict secularization during the single party period, but still we should say that the religion of Islam continued to be an important part of social life, or continued to be important part of the value system of the majority of Turkish people. So that's why we can say that in response to the forced exclusion of these popular elements of Islam from the public sphere, some conservative people, religiously conservative people, began to establish their own informal networks and their own education system. And we have observed the extension of this education system and also these informal networks in Turkish society. And recently, as you know, we have observed the failed coup attempt, which was initiated by Fethullah Gülen community in 2016. Why I'm referring to Fethullah Gülen community? Because it established its own education system. It established not only in Turkey, at global level, established a transnational network. So that's why this is very significant to underline this fact in relation to the reaction of conservative people to the secularizing reforms of the founders of the Republic. What else? I mean, in relation, another significant misunderstanding related to the secularization in Turkey, many people believe that there is a separation of state and religion in Turkey. But it was not initially, yes, it was the aim of the founders of the Republic, but we should say that, especially with the establishment of the Directorate of Religious Affairs, we can say that the religion was put under the control of the state rather than separation of state and religion. Maybe we can discuss it later on. And one final maybe anecdote in relation to the success of secularism in Turkey. I and my colleague, she is also a very good friend of Balkan, Yasemin Akbaba. She's teaching in Gettysburg College in the United States, and we have been connecting our courses which are offered in Gettysburg College and in my university, Izmir University of Economics, since the spring of 2011. We are trying to provide a more dynamic cross-national learning environment for our students, and we merged our courses through Skype sessions, and we conducted classroom-to-classroom discussion through Skype. And in one of these sessions, we asked our students to discuss about the question whether the secularism formula of Turkey was successful or not. It was so interesting for me to observe the differences between American students and Turkish students. And majority of Turkish students believe that Turkish secularism is not successful. But majority of American students think that Turkish formula of secularism is successful. And for my part, I can say that it is so disappointing to observe that in contemporary Turkey, in our youth or our students, let's say, they do not have positive views about the future of secularism, about the future of democracy in Turkey. This is so, as I mentioned, so disappointing for me, and we should try to keep our hope alive since we are still living in Turkey, and we should, if necessary, we should struggle for the continuation of secularism and for the continuation of democratic system in our country. And maybe later on we can discuss about how can we return to democracy, or how can we return to maybe parliamentary system. We can discuss it later on. But for the moment, I can stop here and pass the words to Balkan and Nilgun Hoca.
Thanks a lot, Hocam. Thank you very much for for this extensive overview. And I think we will come at the Q&A, what is to be done component to keep that particular flame alive and to defend the democratic and republican values in that particular way. Nilgun Hocam, Professor Onder, floor is yours.
Excuse me. Thank you, Dr. Devlen. Before I start, I would also like to send my condolences to all those who lost their loved ones in Turkey and Greece. I know it is a difficult time, and I wish you all the best. I know I cannot see you, our audience. You can see us, so we don't have this connection, but hopefully during the discussion period, we will get some questions and we can further delve into some of the issues we are discussing. Initially, I wasn't that sure what to talk about because there is so much to talk about and our time is so limited. So I'm just going to say that I will focus on some of the key values and principles of the Republic of Turkey as I see them as a scholar, as a still citizen of Turkey. I won't be able to go into details, but as I said, hopefully we will have more time. And I certainly agree with my colleague, Dr. Baskan, regarding the historical roots of modernization, westernization, and secularization in Turkey. Of course, these roots go back to the 19th century Ottoman era, and continuing into the Republican era. Of course, there were also some important differences between the late Ottoman era and the Republican era. So we can discuss them later if we have time. So I am going to list the main principles of the Republic of Turkey as they were articulated and standardized, implemented in the years following the foundation of the Republic of Turkey in 1923. And of course, these principles, values did not remain static. Their content and the way they were implemented changed over time as the social, political, international conditions changed. And these principles are nationalism, populism, secularism, republicanism, revolutionism, or reformism, statism, or in French version, étatism, as it is usually known in Turkey. So I am going to focus on some of these principles. Again, I will provide an overall view of these principles. First, the Republic itself. Well, the Republic actually stands for national independence and sovereignty. I don't think anyone can credibly deny the historical significance of the Turkish War of Independence against the European occupiers of Turkish lands at that time, right after the First World War. And I would like to personally note that many Turks are still not aware of the international significance of the Turkish War of Independence against European imperialists. When I talk to my colleagues from South Asia, Southeast Asia, for example, they note how much impact the Turkish War of Independence left on their society, on their anti-colonial struggles in the 1930s, 40s, and early 1950s. So I would like to note that. And the creation, of course, the Republic also meant a transition from a hereditary political rule centered on the Ottoman dynasty to the rule of an elected government. And the Republic of Turkey declared that sovereignty belongs to the people, not to a sultan, padishah, or king. In other words, sovereignty resides in the Turkish nation as a whole. And this was obviously a very modern concept going back to the, of course, late 18th century, 19th century, and it later evolved. If we use the Turkish statement, egemenlik, kayıtsız, şartsız milletlenir. Sovereignty resides in the Turkish nation as a whole. And as part of this, the Republic also instituted a system of citizenship away from the earlier tradition of subjects. All individuals that constitute the nation became citizens of the Turkish state as opposed to the subjects of the Sultan. And at the same time, individual citizens were endowed with certain inalienable legal claims and rights against or vis-a-vis the state. And this was further reinforced by the Republic's principle of populism. This principle of populism rejected any formal and status inequalities and privileges among the members of the nation people. And during the formative years of the Republic, I should add that this principle of populism also kind of adopted a solidarist view of society. And the solidarist view of society also rejected the existence of social class divisions such as aristocracy versus commoners, and also a religious hierarchy, the rule of a religious hierarchy vis-a-vis believers. I would like to note that the notion of citizenship, of course, is not equal to democracy, but it lies at the foundation of democracy. And at this point, I would also like to open a big parenthesis and emphasize that soon after the creation of the Republic of Turkey, women in Turkey became equal citizens to men as they acquired the right to vote and to be elected. They were given, or they acquired the right to vote first in the local elections in 1930, and then in the National Assembly elections from 1930 on. And at this time, if we look at the history of this time, there were less than 20 countries in the entire world that had recognized women's right to vote and stand for election. So it is really important to recognize the significance of the women's gaining the right to vote and stand for election at this point in time in Turkey. It represents a milestone in the era of women's rights. Was it enough? Of course not. But it is also important to recognize what kind of milestone it constituted for Turkish women as well as for women in the world. Now, I am going to very briefly explain my understanding of the Republic's principle of nationalism, because this principle, again, of course, has evolved, changed in a variety of ways, but it didn't really lose its kind of core meaning, the Republic's principle of nationalism. I would argue that the Republic adopted a notion of nationalism more as a civic type of nationalism. And we can contrast the civic type of nationalism with the more exclusionary understanding of nationalism defined in terms of ethnicity or bloodlines or race, etc. So the Republic defined the Turkish nation in terms of a shared history, culture, language, and shared goals and aspirations for the future. And anyone who said they belong to the nation of Turkey would be a member of the Turkish nation. And I would like to quote Atatürk's very relevant statement at this point, because this statement really embodies this more civic understanding of Turkish nation and Turkish nationalism. And he stated that, first in Turkish, Türkiye Cumhuriyeti'ni kuran Türkiye halkına Türk milleti denir. If I can translate it into English, it says, the people of Turkey who created the Republic of Turkey is called the Turkish nation. Of course, I do recognize that this view of Turkish nation was not based on a multicultural pluralist understanding of the nation, and it privileged the Turkish language. As we know, not only was Turkish the only official language as recognized, and which is still the case, and also the building of a Turkish nation revolved around the Turkish language. The Turkish language was a main binding tie that brought together diverse cultural groups and also former refugees from the former Ottoman territories. And I would also like to emphasize that the Republic adopted and implemented the principle of secularism, but at the same time, Sunni Islam was important to Turkish nation building. and the subsequent dominant conception of the Turkish nation. So this means that those whose first language were Turkish and were Sunni Muslim in practice actually came to be seen as the core of the Turkish nation. But despite that, I would still say that the Turkish nation was still not conceived in terms of more primordial bloodlines, race, ethnicity, etc. I know my colleague, Dr. Baskan, gave us a very good presentation on the principle of secularism, its historical roots. I would also like to briefly talk about this principle because secularism, the principle of secularism, has faced the biggest challenges among all the 6 principles of the Republic, and more so than even the principle of nationalism. And I would say that the principle of secularism currently experiencing an existential crisis in Turkey and in some other countries as well. As Dr. Baskan explained very well, of course, this principle had roots in the late Ottoman era, and when it was officially adopted in Turkey following the creation of the Republic, of course, it was shaped by the prevailing social political conditions of the country, and also by the nature of the political and legal system it aimed to replace, the Ottoman state. And many of you know the Turkish Republic's principle of secularism or understanding of secularism was also influenced by the French notion of laicity. But Turkish secularism also had its own features. Since secularism is a constant point of discussion in Turkey and abroad today, I would like to briefly outline that there are different approaches to secularism. And there is the Anglo-Saxon version of secularism, and this version puts the emphasis on the freedom of religion from the state, first and foremost, and then the state's responsibility to keep equal distance from any religion. But I would also like to note that this second aspect of Anglo-Saxon secularism has really not been fully realized in any country. If you look at the USA, we can easily see how and why. Another major approach to secularism is the French idea of laicity. Laicity puts the emphasis on a strict separation between the state and religion. Because the French notion of laicity or secularism was primarily a reaction or a response to the long historical domination of the Catholic Church in the areas of culture, education, and even politics in France. As a result, laicity sought to restrict as much as possible the influence and representation of religion in the public sphere. So when we analyze Turkish secularism or the principle of secularism, we see that it adopted some aspects of French laicity, but in addition, Turkish secularism, as my colleague also explained, instituted a range of controls over religion, and more specifically, the religion of Islam as a dominant religion, excuse me, in the country. And later, this control took the form of the creation of the Directorate of Religious Affairs, in Turkish, Diyanet İşleri Başkanlığı, and also the establishment of a number of Imam Hatips. The role of the Imam Hatips was to train enlightened preachers, and as well as, of course, to institute some controls over the interpretation, practice, and organization of the religion of Islam in Turkey. And I would note that the establishment of such state checks or controls over the practice and organization of Islam was partly because of the fact that the legitimacy of the Ottoman state, the Republic replaced, was primarily based on the Ottoman state's claim to represent and defend Islam. Please note that the Ottoman state was not a theocratic state either, and Filiz Başkan also pointed that out, but it still recognized the supremacy of the Sharia law over human-made laws, despite the fact that a number of civil codes or human-made codes were adopted and implemented throughout the history of the Ottoman Empire. With the adoption of secularism, following the creation of the Republic of Turkey, the supremacy, this idea of the supremacy of the religious law gave way to the supremacy of lawmaking by the elected representatives of the sovereign Turkish nation. I would also argue that secularism is a key foundation of democracy, although it is not equal to democracy, but it's very difficult to have a consolidated democracy without the principle of secularism at the same time. So I would say that the Republic's adoption of secularism, or laiklik in Turkish, created a foundation for the subsequent transition to a more democratic system after the Second World War. However, as we also know, although both secularism and democracy grew deep roots in Turkish society, they also came under attacks a number of times during the past 70 years or so, or since the mid-20th century. And as we know, democracy was interrupted by military interventions several times in recent Turkish history. So to complement what I've just outlined thus far, I would like to note that the founding leaders of the Republic were very much influenced by the European Enlightenment thinking and philosophy, and more specifically positivism. For example, by the philosophy, sociology of French sociologist Emile Durkheim, and before him, Auguste Comte. This positivist thinking puts the emphasis on science, scientific methodology, and human reason as the principal guide for human conduct, especially in the public sphere, as well as in the area of education. This way of thinking invites individuals to think for themselves, in spite of, and sometimes in opposition to, the prevailing dominant traditions, convictions, and beliefs. So this perspective, this way of thinking, was well captured in Atatürk's call upon teachers to educate free thinking generations. In his own words in Turkish, fikri hür, vicdanı hür ve irfanı hür nesiller. Did we accomplish this principle? Not that much, I would say. But this thinking was also born or was also simultaneous with the creation of the Republic of Turkey. And to conclude, I am going to call upon all of us not to feel nostalgic for a lost golden Republican era. I don't know if there was a golden Republican era actually when I look back. And it is, although it is important to recognize all these accomplishments of the Republic of Turkey and the significance, the values of these principles I have just outlined, it is also important to recognize the limitations of the Republic's foundational principles, especially in the contemporary world. Thus, it is incumbent on us, if we believe in these principles, to continually adapt these principles to our changing and our continually changing society and culture. So what is constant is actually change. And the nature and direction of change are not beyond collective human action. Through collective human action, the nature and direction of change can be shaped. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Onder, and I'll get back to that, the change component in the Q&A. I think that's a very important part. Now I want to turn to you, Birol Hocam, and have your ideas about what we have talked so far, and perhaps also linking it to the foreign policy. You're a very well-known expert on that, on Turkish foreign policy more broadly as well. and perhaps link the discussion we have about the Republican values or their erosion even in the past 2 decades or so, and how that did have an impact on the foreign policy. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Devlen, for inviting me to join this very interesting and informative program. And I want to thank my colleagues for excellent and very detailed and thought-provoking overview of the important topics they have covered. Before I start sharing my thoughts, I do want to extend my condolences to the entire nations of Turkey and Greece for this tragic earthquake that shocked everybody yesterday, and wishing speedy recovery to all of those who are fighting for their lives in hospitals. And hopefully in this terrible year of 2020, these people who are now facing the dilemma, or do we go back to our homes and face aftershocks in already damaged buildings, or stay outside and huddle together in what is a welcome situation for COVID transmission. It's a no-win situation, and I hope that the authorities take all those into consideration very seriously as they find temporary shelter for these people. It's really a tragic situation. My colleagues already covered a lot of very important topics, and I'm going to just say that they are spot on. As you know, I have been studying Turkish political development for over 40 years now. And I still believe that it's a very important case study in how democracy comes to a shattered country and starts from very humble beginnings with totally uneducated society and unskilled workforce. We have to remind ourselves that 97% of the workforce in the new republic in early 1920s was unskilled. That is a remarkable situation to look at that, and the shuttered economy, and start a new beginning, completely different than anything else that multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society tried to build a nation state. And yes, nation state. And it hasn't been easy. It's been faced with challenges from its early humble beginnings. And I think we need to ask ourselves, what does it take for a democracy to be consolidated? And is democracy in Turkey ever consolidated? What's that lack thereof that challenges constantly this country? And it's not just unique to Turkey. I mean, look at United States today. Democracy in the United States is challenged. Who would have thought, right? The Constitution hasn't dramatically changed in this country over 200 years. But rising populism is now presenting a very serious challenge. Rising religiosity is an important issue that gives rise to religious reactionarism. We need to separate religious reactionarism, which is the political aspect of bringing religion back into public sphere and state affairs, from religiosity. And I have been spending a lot of time studying value surveys, as you know, as being part of the World Value Survey research team. And now we have continuous data from early 80s in Turkey, from 89, 91 until now. And then we have similar works to World Value Survey of extensive studies by other scholars in Turkey, notably Ersin Kalaycıoğlu and Ali Çarkoğlu, looking at these issues. It's very interesting. I have the research archives of two dear friends on Islamic reactionarism in Turkey, going back to early 80s. One is the late Bernard Lewis, and the other is another historian, Howard Reed. And they were the first ones in the West to write about reemergence of Islamic reactionarism in the Turkish state during the Menderes era. But as one day I was comparing, we were talking about this issue with Bernard Lewis after a meeting in Washington, and he said, Birol, I knew Menderes. He was an autocrat too, but he was never able to control the judiciary. Today, Turkish judiciary has lost its independence, and I fear for its future. That was about 8 years ago, I think, 9 years ago. And we see that. What has happened in 10 years' time in Turkey is a remarkable paradigm shift. When Turkey was pushing for the EU membership, and that's where the foreign policy also mixes with the political reforms, there was a bright moment that said to all of us, things are looking good. EU approved the accession talks. That meant the political acquis was satisfied, and it can only get better as accession talks continue. So if you look at Politifor and other measures of democracy in the country, things were improving. And that is contrary to what we saw before. What we saw before was a roller coaster of democratic development in Turkey. Up, down, and in a matter of, oh, good God, less than 90 years, how many times the constitution was changed wholesale? That doesn't mean institutionally the system is consolidated. There's a problem. There's a very serious problem. But then that glimmer of hope, if you will, of further democratization and consolidation of Turkey reversed itself and turned into a continuous decline in the measure of democracy in the country. It became a system of a presidential system where the president is unaccountable. You have a system now of diktat of legislative majority. There is a disdain towards judicial oversight. Independence of judiciary is gone. There is intolerance towards opposition and opposition ideas. And I fear that step by step, the system is falling back to absolutism, or what I would call patrimonial arbitrary rule. Sort of like I hate to say it, I'm going to borrow a word from a colleague, Neo-Hamidian era of Abdul Hamid period. And we saw what that led to in the last days of the Ottoman Empire. This is supported, but what I would consider the biggest threat today to representative liberal democracies. And it's not just in Turkey, but in other Western democracies. And I view Turkish democratic experience as mirroring mostly the French ideals, as my colleagues shared. And if you look at the roots of the words, the principles, they're mostly French. Laïcité, I teach my students the difference between secularism and laïcité, not the same. And American students don't understand what that means. So you have to explain to them it's not separation of church and state and non-interference, which has now been eroded in the US. But in this case, moving from religious institutions being above the state And I tell them, if you want to understand why the French reversed it and put the state on top of state religious institutions and put state control over them, and in Turkey, constitutionally, all of the imam are basically bureaucrats, and they work for the state. They just, their minds just go tilt. So you try to explain to them what this means, and they say, why? Why is etatism so strict? And I said, well, have you ever seen the movie Three Musketeers? And the collusion between the cardinal and the priest against the king? That's how far back it goes. But populism today has been turned into this, the rebuilding of the glorious past. And often without real understanding of what that glorious past was. Okay? Creation of a personal police force or a security force. And we see that happening in rising authoritarian regimes, very much so. Populist policies. I mean, I'm banging my head against the wall trying to figure out why people in the United States, these people who are suffering the most under neoliberal economic policies over the last 30 years, are supporting an individual. He is the prime example of such people who push those policies and think that their liberation is in in his hands. And then creation of clientelism, personal cult. These fly in the face of what I would consider democratic values. And I would add something else here that is a challenge to democracies. And Turkey is facing this very much. If you pay close attention, there's a whole sorts of YouTube videos now about this or that, about foreign policy challenges. Everybody's going to come and invade Turkey. The no problem policy has turned into fight with everybody around you. And that is very dangerous. It may divert attention of leaders or people from domestic problems to external issues. But at the same time, if you're not careful enough, you fall into the trap of your adversaries. And in this case, the Russians are the best ones. And they're doing it globally. They are using information warfare through social media to shape the minds and beliefs of societies. Their attack on Western societies through information warfare is a physical one of cyber attacks to disrupt and break down the computer systems. That's one thing, but at the same time, there's a cognitive psychological attack. Goal is to disrupt, distort, deteriorate, and create mistrust in these democracies. And it also plays into dividing the societies into sort of two very rigid camps. And it helps voter realignment into camps that become very conflictual. The Turkish democratic experiment, unfortunately, has faced this problem very seriously. At the same time, rising Islamic, what I call counter-revolution, since the early days, raising its ugly head in the 50s, and then most significantly since the 1980 coup. Some of us wrote about this for 40 years, capturing the state from within. And I mean, they were not hiding anything. It's written in the early documents of the discussions of the reactionaries. Not everybody in Turkey is an Islamic reactionary. On the contrary, but those who are involved in wanting to change the state back to an Islamic state have been very successful and use democracy very cleverly. So what does it take for democracies to be consolidated? That's a tough one. One is institutions. Yes, Turkey had the institutions, but how is it that these institutions collapsed within a decade? Why weren't they strong? We also have to look at the social values in the country. And I find here the measures of Ron Engelhardt and Christian Welzel very important and very telling. And also, Wolfgang Merkel in Germany writes about this. When we look at the values of societies on democracy and what are important elements of democracy, we find out that it's a very complex one. On the one hand, unless you have embedded genuine democracy with values of post-materialism, liberties, genuine commitment to accountability, holding people responsible, protecting your voter rights, and so forth, your autonomous thinking, rather than a traditional religious conservative groupthink, then institutions are very vulnerable. And when we compare survey results in Turkey to Western European societies, they tend to be a lot more in the a quadrant which we call more post-materialist and more secular. The Turkish society is unfortunately in the lower left quadrant, which is more traditional and increasingly moving in that direction, and materialist, survivalist. When you have people who are in a survivalist mode, me first, I am trying to survive, make ends meet, they become highly more vulnerable to populist propaganda and agenda. And that doesn't go towards defending the democratic institutions. You can't just do away with it. This doesn't mean Turkey doesn't have any people in the society over there that who are secular, postmodern, just the numbers are small. Okay, numbers are very small compared to other societies. Now, United States, very shaky. It's smack in the middle compared to Western Europeans or Nordic countries. Very interesting stuff. Its foreign policy, unfortunately, is not helping. Turkey has gone from being an ally with a capital A in NATO to an ally in name only. That's very unfortunate, because in this reshaping of the world security order, there are regional players, particularly Russia, which is economically flat and not a great superpower anymore, regardless of its nuclear arsenal. It has a deteriorating military. Its capabilities are very limited, but it is trying to disintegrate NATO by playing to the populist and quote quasi-friendly approaches towards vulnerable members. Turkey is one of them. Turkey has came onto the scene as if it's going to be the liberator of the Middle East. Nobody invited Turkey to be in that position. And we see that in the Arab world today. Everybody is lining up against Turkey. And that should make people think twice. And taking on NATO allies as if NATO allies are Turkey's enemies, and saying that Russia is our friend. There are a lot of people arguing for that linkage. I think that is a call for total disaster. All you have to do is read a little bit of Ottoman Russian history to understand what this means. And the Cold War in Turkey after World War II started immediately, not in 1952 when Turkey joined NATO. It started in 1945 when Soviet Union demanded territorial concessions from Turkey and joint control of the straits. That goal has not disappeared. And there is an ironclad rule in world politics that says never ally with the bully next door. So I will leave it at that for now and look forward to discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Birol Hocam. Unfortunately, we are at the 1 hour mark. This has been a great panel. So I did not want to sort of jump in because I've been listening and learning quite a bit, and I'm sure our listeners are that. So I'm just going to go 5 minutes over, and ask you just in 1 minute. We talk about what has been the problems and how this sort of this evolved and the state of democracy in Turkey and the institutions. What is to be done? You know, if you have to give one sort of advice or one suggestion, particularly to the young people who are watching this, both in Turkey and abroad, what will be the one thing to sort of reverse and set the course back on a democratic, secular, modernized Turkey? What would be the one thing you would do? And 1 minute each. Filiz Hocam, let me start with you.
Okay, thank you, Balkan. Recently, this is my favorite question, and academically, I'm working on trying to answering that question, and my end result is that it is a duty of opposition, because the governing party is already successful. It is controlling all the financial resources, it's controlling the media and so on. It established its own system. So that's why the opposition should unite, okay? Should unite their forces. So I have been working on the Republican People's Party recently, because it's the main opposition party. It is the founding party and it is the main opposition party right now. So for Republican People's Party, what should they do? First of all, there are three strategies of the opposition parties in any dominant party system. The first one is the coalition building, and the second one is ideological positioning, and the third one is active, getting the support of the people, okay? So when we look at the performance of the Republican People's Party, it is really successful, especially in relation to establishing coalition, or let's say pre-electoral coalitions, together with the other opposition parties. And we have observed the success of the opposition, especially in the recent 2019 local elections. So they should keep doing this for me in order to remove to be able to remove the governing party. This is the only way for me. Thanks.
Nilgun Hocam?
Okay, that's a very tough question. First, overcome the fear. The current regime is really creating fear of the other. Its strategy is based on fear and terrorizing the other, and further polarizing society along us versus them. So we need to really struggle against this kind of divisive, highly polarizing rhetoric. And first, we need to be more fearless. And we should not buy into this highly divisive type of outlook and discourse. We need to be more unifying and a more embracing political thinking needs to be done. I think there are some already movements or some roots of these movements in the making currently, and look at the benefit from the current contradictions, internal contradictions of the current regime. People's trust in the current system is actually eroding. And Dr. Yesilada pointed out that the political control over the judiciary had never happened like this before. And there is increasing distrust among people in the judicial system that really undermines also the credibility of the current political regime. So look at identify the current internal contradictions of the regime and build a counter-hegemonic movement. A counter-hegemonic movement that will embrace many sections of society rather than basing the strategy on us versus them. That's I can say for now.
Excellent, excellent. Birol Hocam, the last word.
I would say that the opposition has to get over its personal divisions. Most of them are based on personalities, divisions rather than ideas, and unite as a front. It's not enough to say Millet İttifakı. You got to do it right. Okay. And at the same time, you have to reach down to the people. This has been the problem of the elite, political elite in Turkey. They always save Turkey in çay bahçeleri, in coffee shops. Okay. But nobody understood what was happening at the villages. When we were talking about way back in 87, 88, discussions, again, where? At the drinking halls and Atatürk Orman Çiftliği from ODTÜ as we left the offices on Friday to talk among ourselves. We were all saying, is this going to happen in Turkey? Turkey is not Iran. And I kept saying, I was just getting into this research about rising Islamic reactionary politics. And I was very worried. And one person, I'll never forget, Professor Gencay Şaylan said to me, you guys are all wrong. This can happen in Turkey because none of you visited the villages in Turkey. I went everywhere in Turkey and there is a rising tide. Wake up. Okay? That's a very good thing. Grassroots movements. I wrote about this back in the 90s about the Refah Party, the most successful party, in my opinion, in reaching down to the people after the Atatürk Revolution, okay? And actually asking people what they need. That is their success story. The opposition in Turkey should take advantage of the terrible problem the economy is in right now, the societal problems Turkey is now, political, foreign affairs problems. It's falling apart like a house of cards. Take advantage of it, unite, and reach down to the people. Once you do that, the second thing has to be, and democracy cannot survive without this, education reform. It's gone backwards in a very, very dangerous way. You have to rebring secular public education.
Excellent. On that more or less positive note, that we should not sort of feel hopeless, but that these values, the democratic values and the Republican values we talked about, actually have deeper roots and can be revived. I'd like to thank all the panelists, and we perhaps should do another panel on the solutions component by itself. But I'd like to thank all three panelists for joining us today, and for our viewers watching it, our Center in Modern Turkish Studies and Council of Turkish Canadians panel. We will continue these series in the coming months and years, hopefully, given that we are all now stuck at home at any rate. This enables us to bring these excellent speakers to you and talk with us. So thank you very much for watching. And